They were not important men. That is the first thing you need to understand. The shepherds outside Bethlehem were not romanticized figures in a painting. They were field workers. They slept on cold ground. They smelled like the animals they kept. In first century Jewish society, a shepherd's testimony was not accepted in a court of law. The Mishnah considered them unable to keep Torah properly, too occupied with their flocks, too far from the synagogue. They were, by almost every cultural measure of their world, unreliable. And yet, the sky broke open above them, not above the temple in Jerusalem, not above the home of a priest or a scholar or a Roman official, above a field, above men whose names nobody recorded. The angel of the Lord appeared, and the Greek word Luke uses for what happened next is phobos, not unease, not worry, raw terror, the kind that locks your legs and stops your breath, the kind your body produces when it encounters something it was not built to handle. And the first thing the angel said was this: fear not. Here's what most people miss. Jesus had not yet been born when those words were spoken. He was still hours away, still in a stable, still being wrapped in cloth by a tired young mother. And already, the announcement of his arrival began with the same two words he would spend his entire ministry repeating. Fear not. He said it to a teenage girl in Nazareth. He said it to fishermen in a storm. He said it to a father whose daughter had just died. He said it to 3 men face down on a mountain after the voice of God came out of a cloud. He said it to an old man alone on a volcanic island in the Aegean Sea, the last of his friends still alive, exiled by an emperor, with nothing left but a vision so overwhelming it put him on the ground. This is not a story about courage. This is not a story about positive thinking. This is not a story about overcoming your fears. This is a story about what happens when God shows up in the middle of yours. And there is one person in this account, one person who heard those words from Jesus twice. Once before Jesus was born, and once long after everyone else who loved him was dead. When you understand who that person is, the whole pattern clicks into place. We will get to that person, but not yet. Picture the town of Nazareth, not the city it is today, not a pilgrimage site with souvenir shops and tour buses. In the first century, Nazareth was a hillside village of perhaps 400 people. It had no mention in the Old Testament, no military significance, no trade route running through it. When Nathanael first heard that the Messiah might come from there, his response was not theological disagreement, it was a laugh. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? That is where she lived. Mary was young. Most scholars place her between 14 and 16 years old, which was a normal age for betrothal in first century Jewish culture, and which should stop you for a moment, because before you picture the serene figure in stained glass, with the calm hands and the knowing eyes, you should picture a girl in a one-room house in a nobody town, doing the ordinary work of an ordinary afternoon, when the room filled with something that was not ordinary at all. Luke tells us the angel Gabriel came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." And then Luke gives us one of the most honest lines in the entire gospel. He says Mary was greatly troubled and tried to figure out what kind of greeting this was. She was not calm. She was not immediately peaceful. She was trying to think her way through something her mind could not process. And this is where it gets remarkable. Gabriel does not wait for her to settle. He does not say, "Let me explain everything, and then you will feel better." He speaks peace before the explanation. He says, "Fear not, Mary, for you have found favor with God." And only after that, only once he has addressed the terror in her chest, does he tell her what is coming. The Greek word for what Gabriel uses here is the same root as what the shepherds felt in the field. Phobos, the freeze, the full body alarm of encountering something beyond the human frame. God does not wait for your circumstances to improve before he speaks peace. He speaks peace first. That is not a small thing. That is the entire logic of the gospel compressed into one conversation between an angel and a girl on a Tuesday afternoon in a village nobody important had ever visited. Mary said yes, with her hands still probably shaking, with her mind still turning over what any of this could mean. She said yes. 2 words had made that possible. Fear not. It was 3 a.m. That detail matters. Matthew tells us the disciples had been rowing since evening, which means they had been fighting the storm for somewhere between 6 and 9 hours. These were not men who panicked easily on water. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were professional fishermen. They had grown up on the Sea of Galilee. They knew its moods, its sudden squalls, its geography in the dark. If men like these were straining at the oars and going nowhere, the storm was serious. And then they saw something moving toward them on the surface of the water. Matthew uses a specific word for what they thought it was. Phantasma, a phantom, a ghost, and they cried out in fear. Not one of them, all of them, grown men, experienced sailors, screaming in a storm, because what was walking toward them did not belong to the category of things that should be walking toward them. And Jesus said, and you almost have to hear the calm in it, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." The Greek word for take heart there is thario. It is not a passive word. It does not mean calm down or relax. It means be actively courageous. Stand up straight, steady yourself. It is the word you would say to a soldier before a battle, and not a child before a nap. Jesus is not telling them to feel less. He is telling them to stand in what they feel and choose steadiness anyway. Stay with me, because here is what happens next. Only Peter says, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus says one word, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat. Now, most sermons you have heard about this passage focus on the moment Peter sinks. And yes, he sinks. He looks at the wind, he feels the fear come back, and he starts to go under. But do not miss what happens in the 3 seconds before that. Peter walks on water. A fisherman from Bethsaida, a working man whose calloused hands had pulled nets his entire life, walked on the surface of the Sea of Galilee at 3 a.m. in a storm. Fear not was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the walk. Jesus reached out and caught him, and the wind stopped. And the men in the boat did the only thing that made sense. They worshiped. 2 words had gotten Peter out of the boat. Do you see the pattern forming? Every time Jesus says, "Fear not," he says it before the resolution arrives, not after the storm calms. Not after the pregnancy is explained, not after Peter is safely back in the boat. He speaks into the middle of the fear, before the outcome is known, before the circumstances change, before there is any visible reason to feel peace. That pattern is going to matter before this video is over. If this is the kind of content that is changing how you read your Bible, take 2 seconds and subscribe. And I want to ask you something in the comments. We will come back to it at the end. For now, stay with me, because the next story is the one that undoes me every time. His name was Jairus. He was a ruler of the synagogue in Capernaum, which means he was not a nobody. He was a man of standing, responsible for the administration of worship, the keeper of the building, a figure of public authority in his community. Josephus, writing about Galilean society in this period, makes clear that synagogue rulers occupied a respected position in the social order. They were men other men deferred to. And Jairus came to Jesus and fell at his feet in public, in front of a crowd. A powerful man, face to the ground, begging. His daughter, his 12-year-old daughter, was dying, and he had run out of options. Jesus went with him. Here's the part nobody tells you. On the way to Jairus' house, a woman touched the hem of Jesus' garment and was healed, and Jesus stopped to find out who had touched him. The crowd pressed in, time passed, and while they were still standing there, a messenger arrived from the house of Jairus with news that traveled like a blade. Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Luke tells us Jesus heard it. He heard the message. He saw Jairus receive it. And he turned to the man and said 5 words: do not fear, only believe. Not I am so sorry, not let me explain what I am about to do. Not a plan, not a timeline, not a guarantee he could articulate. Just 5 words spoken directly into the worst moment of a father's life. The Hebrew equivalent of this phrase, altira, appears more than 70 times in the Old Testament. God said it to Abraham before Isaac was born. He said it to Joshua before Jericho fell. He said it to Gideon before the battle. He said it to Isaiah before his commission. Jesus is not inventing new language on that road to Jairus' house. He is reaching back 4,000 years and pulling out the oldest promise in the Hebrew scriptures. Do not fear, only believe. And then he walked into the house and woke the girl up. There is a mountain in northern Galilee. Most scholars believe it was Mount Hermon, nearly 9,000 feet above sea level, snow on its peak, even in summer. Jesus took 3 men up that mountain: Peter, James, and John. They had been with him for perhaps 2 years by this point. They had seen the feeding of the 5,000. They had watched Jairus' daughter sit up in her bed. They had been in the boat the night Peter walked on water. Of all the disciples, these 3 were the inner circle, the ones Jesus trusted with what the others did not yet see. And still, Matthew tells us that on that mountain, Jesus was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. And then 2 figures appeared: Moses, who had been dead for over 1,000 years, and Elijah, who had been taken to heaven in a chariot of fire 8 centuries before that. And while Peter was still stammering about building shelters for all of them, a bright cloud covered the mountain and a voice came out of it. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Matthew says the 3 disciples fell on their faces and were terrified, not overwhelmed, not awed in a pleasant way, terrified. The same root word, phobos, that locked the shepherd's legs in the field, that froze Mary in her room in Nazareth, that made the disciples scream when they saw something walking toward them on the water. The full body alarm of standing somewhere your humanity was not designed to stand. Now watch what happens next. Jesus came and touched them. Matthew records it as a physical act. He walked over to 3 men face down in the dirt, and he reached out and he touched them and he said, rise, have no fear. Not a speech, not a theological explanation of what they had just witnessed. A touch, and 2 words. This is the moment I want you to hold on to as we move toward the end of this story. Because what Jesus does on that mountain, the touch before the explanation, the peace before the understanding, the presence before anything else, is exactly what he is going to do one more time. Decades later, to the last man standing, his name was John. He was the youngest of the 12 when Jesus called him. He was the one who leaned against Jesus at the Last Supper. He was the one standing at the foot of the cross when almost everyone else had run. He was the one who ran to the empty tomb and saw the folded burial cloths and believed before he fully understood. And now it was approximately 65 years after that morning at the tomb. Every other apostle was gone, executed. James, John's own brother, beheaded by Herod. Peter crucified upside down in Rome. Paul beheaded on the Appian Way. Eusebius records that John was the last surviving eyewitness of Jesus' ministry, exiled to the island of Patmos under Emperor Domitian, approximately AD 95. Patmos is a small volcanic island in the Aegean Sea, black rock 8 miles long. The kind of place empires sent people they wanted to disappear. John was alone on that rock, and on a Sunday morning in the spirit, he heard a voice like a trumpet behind him. He turned, and what he saw put him on the ground. He fell at the feet of the risen Christ as though he were dead. This is the open loop from the beginning of this video. This is the person who heard fear not twice. Once as a young man on a mountain, face down in the dirt, when Jesus crossed the distance and touched his shoulder. And once as an old man on a rock in the sea, face down again with nothing left of the world he had built his life around. And Jesus reached down. Again, the same motion, the same words. Fear not, I am the first and the last. Think about what John knew in that moment. He had heard this voice before. He had felt this touch before. 40 years of exile and loss and grief and watching everyone he loved die for their faith. And the hand was the same. The words were the same. There is a moment in the middle of the night when a child wakes from a nightmare. The room is dark. The fear is completely real to them. Their heart is hammering. Their mind cannot separate dream from waking. And the darkness presses in from every side. And then a parent appears in the doorway. They do not explain the dream. They do not deliver a lecture on the neuroscience of nightmares. They cross the room. They sit on the edge of the bed. If they put a hand on the child's back and they say, I am here. That is what Jesus keeps doing. He does not explain the storm to Peter. He catches him. He does not explain the grief to Jairus. He walks with him. He does not explain the exile to John. He shows up on the rock. Fear not is not a command to feel brave. It is not a suggestion that your circumstances are less serious than they seem. It is a declaration that God has already moved, that he is already in the room, and that the fear, real as it is no longer the last word. So here is what we have seen. A teenage girl in a nobody town alone in a room about to receive news that would change the entire human story. And the first thing spoken to her was fear not. Field workers on cold ground, the lowest men on the social ladder of their world, watching the sky split open above them. And the first thing spoken was fear not. A fisherman stepping out of a boat at 3 a.m. into a storm, fear not. A synagogue ruler standing on a road receiving word that his daughter had stopped breathing, fear not. 3 men face down on a mountain after the voice of God came out of a cloud, fear not. An old man alone on a black rock in the Aegean Sea, the last one left, 60 years of faithfulness behind him. Fear not. No category is excluded. The young and the old, the powerful and the invisible, the men who had walked with Jesus for years and the men who had never met him before that night. Every one of them terrified. Every one of them reached. Here's what that means for you. Takeaway 1. Jesus does not reserve these words for people who have earned them. Mary had not yet said yes. The shepherds had not yet done anything. Jairus was a synagogue ruler who had almost certainly kept his distance from Jesus until desperation drove him to the ground. Fear not is not a reward for the faithful. It is an announcement to the terrified. Takeaway 2. He always speaks before the resolution arrives. Every single time in this video, everyone, Jesus said, fear not before the storm cleared, before the daughter woke up, before the exile ended. If you are waiting to feel peace until your circumstances change, you have the order reversed. The peace is not on the other side of the resolution. The peace is what makes the resolution possible. Takeaway 3, and this is the one I want you to carry out of this video. The last recorded words Jesus ever spoke to a human being in scripture were fear not. Not to a crowd, not from a pulpit, to one old man alone on a rock with nothing left. The same words he had been saying his entire ministry, the same hand reaching down, the same voice. He has not stopped saying them. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever the storm is, whatever the midnight looks like, whatever news arrived today that put you on the floor, the same hand that touched John on that mountain and on that rock is extended towards you. 2 words. He keeps saying them. Maybe it is time to let them land. Which one of these fear nots hit you the hardest today? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if this video opens something up for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I will see you in the next one.